The snow began innocently enough, a delicate flurry that painted the evergreens outside the cabin in soft strokes of white. Hollow Pine Retreat, nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains, had promised a serene weekend escape for Dana and her younger brother Tyler. The pair had been close once, but the years had stretched them apart, Dana busy with her demanding job in Boston, and Tyler retreating into his solitary life after their parents passed. This trip had been Dana's olive branch, a chance to mend the quiet rift between them. The cabin was modest but cozy. It had been there since the 1930s, the kind of place where creaky floorboards and drafty windows were part of the charm. There were modern touches, a gas stove, a thermostat that hummed faintly, but it was still very isolated. The nearest town was 20 miles away, reachable only by an unpaved road that wound like a snake through the forest. The retreat's owner had assured them the snow forecasted was light, nothing unusual for December. But by nightfall, the flurries had turned into an unrelenting storm. Inside, the atmosphere was warm at first. They'd lit the fireplace, opened a bottle of red wine, and cooked a simple dinner. The tension eased between them with shared laughter over an old board game they'd found in the cabin. Outside, the snow piled higher. By the time they realized the storm was beyond anything they'd expected, it was too late. Their car, parked at the edge of the gravel driveway, was already buried under a blanket of snow so thick it blended seamlessly in with the landscape. Then the power went out around 9 p.m. It wasn't the suddenness of the outage that unnerved them. It was the silence that followed. The cabin, once alive with the crackle of the fireplace and the hum of the heating system, felt muted, as though the snow outside had swallowed the whole world. Dana found a flashlight in the kitchen drawer, while Tyler set about lighting every candle they could find. Their cell phones had no signal, of course. They hadn't since they had arrived. "Do you think the owner knew the storm was coming?" Tyler asked, his voice tight. Dana shrugged, focusing on keeping calm. It was just a power outage in an old cabin during a snowstorm, nothing unusual. But then came the first sound. A single heavy thud on the roof. Dana and Tyler froze. It wasn't the sound of snow sliding. It was deliberate, as though something or someone had landed up there. Dana turned her flashlight toward the ceiling, the beam trembling as she tried to convince herself it was nothing more than a branch falling. "Probably just snow," she muttered. "Yeah," Tyler replied. He didn't sound very convinced. As the hours dragged on, the temperature inside the cabin dropped. Dana and Tyler layered up, their breath visible in the candlelight. The wind outside screamed like a living thing, shaking the shutters. But what made Dana the most unsettled was the sound of soft, almost imperceptible footsteps crunching in the snow outside. She dismissed it as the storm playing tricks on her ears, until Tyler leaned in, whispering, "Do you hear that?" It wasn't just crunching now, it was a slow, deliberate pacing around the cabin, as if someone or something was circling them. By midnight, the wind had died down, but the world outside remained a swirling white void. Dana stared out the frost-covered window, her breath fogging the glass. The snow was so thick that even the nearest trees were shrouded in haze. That was when she noticed them. Tracks. And they weren't footprints. They were too long and too narrow, and they didn't sink into the snow like they should have. They seemed to glide across the surface, weaving erratically toward the cabin before stopping just below the window. Her flashlight's beam flickered over the tracks, her heart pounding. She couldn't see where they led as the snow quickly covered them again, but they filled her with a dread she couldn't explain. "Tyler," she whispered, but when she turned, he wasn't there. She found him in the hallway, standing at the back door. He was staring at something on the floor. Wet footprints leading from the door to the staircase. But the door was locked. Dana checked it twice. "We're not alone," Tyler said, his voice barely audible. Dana grabbed his arm, pulling him back to the main room. "Don't panic," she whispered. "We'll figure this out." But deep down, she wasn't so sure. The air in the cabin felt charged, oppressive. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They piled furniture in front of the doors and windows. Out of desperation, Tyler grabbed the iron poker from the fireplace, his knuckles white around it. The storm raged on. At some point, Dana dozed off on the couch, though her sleep was fitful and filled with strange dreams. She woke to the sound of creaking wood, light weight shifting on the floorboards above. Her heart leapt into her throat. Tyler was sitting upright in the armchair, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. "It's in the attic," he whispered. Dana swallowed hard. She didn't remember there being an attic. But then she saw it, a small, square hatch in the ceiling of the hallway, partially hidden by shadows. It hadn't been there before. She was certain of it. The footsteps moved again, slow and deliberate, directly above them. And then a voice. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't human. It was a low, guttural whisper, repeating one single word that Dana couldn't understand. It sounded like an ancient chant, alien yet familiar, and it made her skin crawl. Tyler gripped the poker tighter. "We have to get out of here," he said. But where could they go? Outside was a white abyss, and the snow was still falling heavily. Then, without warning, the hatch creaked open. A cold draft rushed into the room, carrying with it the faint smell of decay. Dana grabbed Tyler's arm, pulling him toward the door. But before they could reach it, the lights flickered back on. For a moment, the cabin was bathed in warm yellow light. The oppressive atmosphere almost lifted, and the sounds from the attic ceased. Dana dared to glance up at the hatch. It was closed again, as though nothing had happened. They didn't waste any time. As soon as the storm let up in the early morning hours, Dana and Tyler braved the freezing cold and dug out the car. The snow was waist deep, and the effort left them breathless and shaking, but they didn't stop until they were safely on the road. They didn't speak of what happened. Not then, not on the drive back, and not in the weeks that followed. But Dana couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been in the cabin hadn't been entirely left behind. Sometimes late at night, she'd hear faint creaks in her apartment or wake up to the thermostat changed to a temperature she hadn't set it to. And every so often, she'd catch a glimpse of something in the corner of her eye. Something that moved too quickly to be real, but left behind wet footprints on her hardwood floor.